Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming out on a Sunday night on a beautiful Minnesota fall day when there's so many other things you could be doing right now, right? But you chose to come here. Dr. G says no. There's a lot of things they could be doing. So thank you for coming. It's been a good day around here so far, and just excited about tonight at what Dr. Goertzen and Karen are going to share with us after a lot of years of marriage and parenting. You guys have it all figured out, right?
Oh, yeah.
These guys have hard questions. I just always say I don't know.
Okay.
Tonight they're going to find out the true answers about good marriages and parenting and all the hard questions they have. So thanks for coming. It's going to be really informal tonight, so we'll have about a hour of teaching and interacting, and then there'll be 15, 20 minutes of questions. So seriously, be thinking about questions, and they don't have to be dealing with the subject matter. So if you just have a question about marriage in general or parenting, tonight's a good night to ask that. So as things are moving along and you have a question comes to mind, just write it down. And when the Q&A time comes, Dr. G will answer all of I'm guaranteeing that up front. He will answer every question you have to your satisfaction. Yeah. So anyway, but it's just been great to be with Dr. Goertzen and Karen. He's a mentor of mine, a leadership mentor, and has been, and just a really godly, wise man. And Karen is a wonderful Christian, mature Christian woman, and so it's just always nice to be around them. And some of you have gotten a chance to interact with them at meals, and they've stayed at some of your places. See, I don't ever use a handheld. I hate handheld mics. So, yeah, so anyway, someone told me to put the mic closer. But anyway, well, I don't want to waste any more of his time. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Leroy Goertzen and Karen, and however you guys want to proceed. Welcome. Why don't you welcome them?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you much. Yeah, let's take just a moment. Let's open the time together in prayer, and then we'll jump into some things here. Lord, thank you so much for the chance we have to be together. It's always a privilege to be together with your people who are part of the body of Christ, who come from all places. And we bring together our experiences, our knowledge and wisdom, and we also bring our heartaches and our brokenness and our weaknesses. And here, Lord, here before the foot of the cross, the ground is level. And we all share this common ground where we are covered by your grace and your love and your forgiveness and your joy. So bless our time together as we just really touch on this holy ground of family relationships, especially marriages. And I just pray, Lord, you would just anoint our conversation and speech as we grow and learn together. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, it is awesome that you would come out on a beautiful day like this. Wow. I will admit, just as an aside, is that I was mentioning here to Peggy, I remember the day years ago at a church that I was pastoring in Garden Grove, California, the day that our board met and decided to end Sunday night services, because that used to be such a regular part of the tradition of church, and that was a hard thing for me to let go of, just because I enjoyed being together with God's people and spending time learning and growing together in that kind of a discipleship mode. But times change. I understand that. Now we look for other ways of accomplishing the same thing, and we do. I'm glad to spend some time with you tonight talking about marriage. And I want you to know kind of from the beginning that this is not going to be a typical ordinary kind of marriage retreat moment. This is kind of a one-session thing. And so if I were doing a marriage retreat, which I'd be meeting 3 or 4 times, which I've done, I would do something very, very differently than what I'm going to do tonight. So I'm not anticipating that anybody's going to go home tonight with these ooey gooey feelings and being all hyped up, and that's not what I'm doing here today. So I know that might be really disappointing and you're not going to get your money's worth, but that's not what this is going to be about. I really have some things I would like to talk about that are more directly related to some ways we can go about, in a broader sense, dealing with our marriages, our family relationships, and even way beyond that. So if you're here, you're single, this will be great. This will work, because this will work for all relationships. If you're married, great. Doesn't make any difference. This is going to be helpful for you. Now, the issue of marriage, of course, is very personal to all of us, but it's personal to me. My wife and I have been married for 47 years. Anyone else here married longer than that? Okay, how long? 57. Okay, wow, thank you for sharing. Yeah, and so there's a lot of experience that goes into that. And, just saying 47 makes me feel old, right? It's like, shame, whoa, my gosh. It's like, where did those years go? Yeah, 47 years young is our marriage. But during that time, I've learned a thing or two about marriage. We are not at the same place. And I know somebody quipped the other day, I heard them say, my wife has been married to me 40 years, but they've been married to 7 different men during that period of time. And that is basically true. We all go through these seasons of life and changes, and that is how it ought to be. That if it ought to be that way. We are who we are by way of DNA and personality type and so forth, but there's tremendous fluidity in the evolution that goes on within our minds and hearts. But one of the things that over the years I've done that I have learned as a pastor and as an educator, especially in doing a lot of marriage counseling, is I've learned a lot of key issues. Now, some of you may be prepared with a counseling program called Prepare Enrich. I don't know, does anybody use that? Have you used it? I use it, and I've been doing it for almost 40 years. And so from that, I've learned a number of things. This is an assessment that I give, especially to couples who are engaged in getting married or to couples who are having some struggles, and it's an assessment that I give. And over a course of 140 to 160 questions, those questions survey about, anywhere from 10 to 15 different topics that are related to marriage. And here are some of the topics that are covered. Communication, conflict resolution, partner style and habits, financial management, leisure activities, sexual expectations, family and friends, relationship roles, spiritual beliefs, marriage expectations, step parenting expectations, health and wellness, even cohabitation issues. So each of these issues has 10 questions that are intermingled through the entire assessment of roughly 160 questions. They're woven in there. And so one of the topics that over the years consistently that has often received the lowest score from married couples, that is when couples complete the assessment, their score, there are 10 questions for each of these, their score out of 10 is almost consistently the lowest. And that topic is? Communication. All right, communication. Anyone else? Financial management. You guys are doing good. There's one lower. conflict resolution is the lowest. And that's been my experience in 40 years. It's consistent, is that conflict resolution tends to be the lowest. And so out of those 10 questions, usually the scores are below 50. That is, they're below 5 that they agree on, and they're challenged there with that particular issue. And so this topic, I don't know if that surprises you or not. Does that surprise you? Okay. Well, it shouldn't, because most people are afraid of conflict. Most people choose to avoid it if they can, which that includes taking all kinds of countermeasures that we are aware of, right? We may even resort to lying to avoid conflict. We might deny. We might blame. We might try to distract. We might ignore. We might offer quick and cheesy apologies, right? We do all kinds of things so that we don't get into it, okay? And by not getting into it, we think that we have manufactured peace, right? Well, that isn't really often the case. And we're going to talk about that at a much deeper level here this evening. But something that I would like to do before we jump into all of that is have you take the conflict resolution, prepare, enrich assessment. Okay? So anyway, we can pass these out. I'd like to just take one. Thank you. Now, we're going to take this assessment. Before you start it, I'm going to give you instructions, okay? You'll need a pencil, if you can find a pencil. And anyway, what we're going to do here, I'll give you some instructions before we get into it, so don't even read it. Just hold it for now. Now, you taking this assessment is a little bit of a cheat job, because remember that these 10 questions, they would be mixed in with 150 others. You wouldn't know that these questions are related to conflict resolution. You wouldn't know that. You wouldn't even know that that's a topic when you take the assessment. You don't know that. You don't know that there are 10 topics. You don't know that. None of that, you know that. You just see a sheet that has 160 questions on it, and you answer it. So you don't know anything. I get the results, and then I share them with a couple, and then they get to see. But so you've got a big head start here, and so it's a little bit of a cheat sheet. But we'll see how this goes. But this will get you familiar with this. Now, what you're going to see, go ahead and turn it open. And what you're going to see is that at the top, there's a scoring key, and there are 5 words, 5 columns: strongly disagree, disagree, undecided, agree, strongly agree. And each one has a number associated with it. All right, so as you read question 1, even during disagreements, I can share my feelings and ideas with my partner. So, do you strongly disagree, agree, or strongly agree? And then you just circle the number. Now, by the way, no 3s are allowed. No 3s. No 3s. No, you got to decide. You don't get to walk the line, ride the fence. I know what men do. It's men who consistently write 3s. And it's like, no 3s. Actually, on the assessment, those of you who use it, you know that a 3 invalidates the question. So it invalidates the question, and they don't even factor it into the score. So a 3 is no. Now, by the way, you can't talk to your spouse. You can't look at each other's paper. You don't compare notes. None of that, okay? So no cheating.
At what decade of our marriage do you want?
Yeah, which man are we talking about? Yeah, that's a good question. Do it current. Let's do it current. Yeah, let's be current. That is such a good question. Yeah, don't be comparing notes. This should take you about 3 minutes. Because for the most part, your first gut response is probably right. And take a lot of reflection. By the way, you're not going to show this to anybody, so don't worry about it. Yeah, I'm going to grade you on the curve here, you know. How are we doing? Yep, we're good? Okay. All right. These questions weren't all that hard, are they? Maybe? Yeah, maybe? Okay. I'm looking at a couple of things. All right, so if you want to kind of take a look at how this works, then the way that it works is that you like take number one for example. Even during disagreements, I can share my feelings and ideas with my partner. So as you look at each other's scores, all right. So see, what did my wife write? She wrote 4. Well, I wrote a 4. Okay, so that means that we agreed on the way that we approach that question, and that's a good thing. Okay, and the way that this, by the way, there actually are right and wrong type answers, but right and wrong is not the right way to say it. But there are ways of looking at each one of these questions that would be a preferred answer. So the preferred answer for number one would be a 4 or a 5, right? That would be a preferred answer. Now, however, if your spouse said 2 and you said 4, what that means is that that's an area of disagreement, and you can put that number down there. We disagree on question 1. If you both wrote a 2, you would put that under special focus and make an appointment with Elvin Okay. If you both agreed, you would put you'd put it under positive couple agreement. And I have indecision there, but there shouldn't be any, because I just told you don't use a 3. But that's how this works. And so you can go home and you can look at this score. You can go through all these questions and see how you scored it. And what I would ordinarily do is say, okay, so I have a couple and they get 20 positive agreement. That means they agreed on 2 of these. And so then I would take a look at those other 8 and say, well, you're disagreeing on 8 of these questions. And so we'd want to talk about why you disagree. Let's just use one as an example. At times I feel some of our differences never get resolved, number 9. By the way, that's one that almost always gets a 4 by most of the people I counsel. Almost always. Is that they agree. At times I feel some of our differences never get resolved. And that is the same issues keep coming up over and over and over again. We just keep talking about them and talking about them. We kind of think we resolve, but we really don't. And so that's a common question that people will agree. They'll have a disagree. Agree, but they're agreeing on the wrong side of the question, because the question should be, a 1 or a 2. That would be the best answer to give there. So are you kind of following this, how you can use this? So you can take this home and take a little bit of time with it, all right? And just kind of compare your notes and laugh a little bit. And you may have an opportunity to talk about a couple of things about how this works. If you want another copy, if you're here by yourself, I'll give you another copy and you can take it home and let your spouse fill them out if they are willing. And again, what I tell couples is that this isn't about being compatible or incompatible. That's not what this is about. What this is about is that this is pointing out that there are some areas in which you're being challenged. And you're struggling through some of these issues, and I want to help you talk through some of those and find a way to work through them. So this one is on conflict resolution, and that kind of explains one of the reasons why. These are some of the reasons why it's such a difficult topic. Now, what I want to do here in moving forward with this, I want to provide kind of a foundation for understanding conflict as it relates to marriage, family, friendships, staff at wherever you're working. And some of this is going to, you may be a little surprised by the approach that I take and I know other people take. So just, you can take some notes. You can use the back side of this sheet of paper. But let me give you some introductory points here to this whole thing. The first thing I think to understand when we're dealing with conflict at every level is, number one, is that conflict is pervasive. It's pervasive. What does that mean? It's everywhere. Not just between humans, but it's everywhere in the natural world. All living things struggle at some level to exist and to accomplish their purposes. There is some point of resistance to almost everything we do, isn't there? Yeah, when we talk about, for example, the balance of nature, we are talking about normal and natural conflict at work. Otherwise, you can't have a balance of nature. So there's conflict everywhere. And that is part of the fall. And so all living things are living in an entire environment in which conflict is normal. This is how the world works. If we get more specific here about marriage and the family, conflict exists at some level most all the time. There's an ongoing battle of the wills. There are differences of opinion, regardless of how small and inconsequential they may seem. And if we were to be honest with ourselves, we would realize that we are oftentimes in conflict with ourselves. Are we not? Are you not often second-guessing? Are you not oftentimes kicking yourself? Yes, oftentimes we call that intra-personal conflict. The Apostle Paul said this, the things I want to do, I don't, and the things I don't want to do, I do. 1 Corinthians 7, right? Well, that's conflict. That's intra-personal conflict that he's dealing with there. And it's normal. It's normal. And so conflict is pervasive. Number 2, conflict is inevitable. It's inevitable. One of the great myths of life is that conflict is avoidable. It's just a myth. It's a myth. Some may be, especially those that are at higher level of conflict. But avoiding conflict doesn't prove that conflict doesn't exist. And it doesn't, by ignoring differences around me or pretending that they don't exist, doesn't mean that they don't matter. One of the primary reasons that conflict is inevitable is that differences, real differences, are part and parcel of the world in which we live. Are they not? I mean, you married somebody who, in most cases, is significantly different than you. Not just biologically, but in most ways. Most people who are introverts marry extroverts. I don't care what part of the disc scale you are on. In most cases, you marry somebody who's almost diametrically your opposite. And one of the myths is that opposites attract. Well, they do, but opposites attack. And and again, if you think that that's negative, our perspective is all wrong. It's normal and natural for that. Okay, and I'm not condoning sin. I'm just saying we need to be honest about the fact that real differences exist. And I should recognize that that is the case. Because if I recognize it, if I acknowledge it, then I'm starting at a very different place in dealing with conflict. We don't have to agree about everything to, in the end, agree about everything. We can be very different. Theologically, we know what's going on here. We have a sin nature that seeks self-expression. It desires to be its own authority. This can only lead to negative conflict. James says this, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? So there are matters of conflict that exist, and we can expect them to exist because the sin nature is alive in us. It hasn't been eradicated. We may be on some level of sanctification, but nonetheless, I'm still a sinner. And I'm going to do things that are hurtful, or I'm going to do things that are just wrong. I'm going to. A third thing here is conflict is often just simply morally neutral. Now, this really throws people off because when I ask a group of people, students included, whether conflict is good or bad or neutral, what will most people say? It's bad. And we couldn't be more wrong. It's wrong. I'm going to be blunt. It's a wrong answer. And it's shocking. It's shocking. So let me ask you, why do you think most people think that conflict is bad? What's that? It starts wars. It doesn't have to start wars, right?
It's perceived as a
It's perceived negatively. And most of the time, we're analyzing the consequences, what comes from it. And we don't realize that the issue itself never needed to end up there. We took it there, right? My attitude, my actions, I took it there. The conflict didn't go there automatically. Who makes decisions for you? Some people say, you make me so mad. Really? You have a gun held to my head that says, be mad or I pull the trigger? Really? Nobody makes you mad. Who makes you mad? Yeah, you do. I do. I make me mad. You can't make me mad. Only I can do that. You do not have that power over me unless I give it to you. But nobody makes you angry. And conflict ends up being bad because of the way that I end up dealing with it. Conflict itself, and that is the situation in which there is disagreement about something, isn't necessarily a problem in and of itself until I interact with it and move it somewhere, take it somewhere. So, okay, I don't need to assess some moral value to someone else's perspective or feelings about something necessarily. For example, if you like the brown leather couch and I like the twilled patterned one, and we can't agree upon which one to purchase for our living room, is that a moral issue? I can make it a moral issue, right? But it isn't a moral issue. It's just a disagreement. It's a disagreement that has tremendous potential for good. But it all depends on me. It depends on us, on how we choose to handle it. So most people try to avoid conflict because they assume that conflict is always negative, it's always bad. We couldn't be more wrong than that. Couldn't be more wrong. It's just not that way. That is not really how it works. Now, my contention is that most conflict is positive. It presents new opportunities to address issues creatively. You get a new chance at dealing with something that you disagree about. Just think about it. If I choose to view conflict negatively, then how am I going to approach it? Where can it go? Where can it go? It can only go down the toilet. That's all it can do. If I start out with thinking, okay, this is not really a moral issue here that we're having between each other or in our family and some deal. Sometimes it is, but many times it isn't. And we say, let's just be positive about it. Let's talk about it openly and honestly and positively about it and try to work out a way through it rather than this negative beating over it, so much so that everybody wants to avoid talking about it, which is what we do. We stop talking about it because we don't like the outcome. We don't like the way that it feels when that happens. All right, number 4, conflict is necessary for change and growth. I'm going to even go a step further. Conflict is actually necessary. Everybody in this room, I think, believes this, but maybe not when I say it. But you believe it. You know it's true. Sanctification, that is that spiritual process by which we're conformed into the image of Christ, that is going to require conflict. It's going to require conflict. Nobody is not going to go easy. Just my sin nature ain't going to let it happen. So there's going to be a battle, and Paul describes this so clearly in Romans 7. That battle is real, and it's harsh. The battle between the self and the spirit. So really, for me to be sanctified is going to require engaging in problems that I have. I'm going to have to address them. Ideas that are in my head, ways of thinking, my worldview, ways of doing things that are different than what the Spirit is leading me to. I know that I may not be in step with the Spirit, as it says in Galatians. I know that I might not be bearing the fruit of the Spirit. Well, to get there, this is not magic. There's no magic in sanctification. It's all hard work that comes through conflict. You're going to be in conflict with the Spirit, conflict with yourself. Marriage relationships grow. They have the potential to grow. Not because you agree about everything and keep the peace. That's not why they grow. I can't remember who the writer is, but he calls that peace faking, not peacemaking. When we attempt to bring peace to every situation without really working through the details. And then we call it good, and we all go away thinking great until the next time it happens. That's peace faking. Doesn't make real peace. You know, in the old days, we used to call that détente. Right? Remember that? Détente. The relationship between the U.S. and the USSR. Yeah, there was no real peace there. It's just the appearance of it. Okay? In most cases, if there isn't any low-level conflict in a relationship, and this is what I look for when I do marriage counseling, if there isn't any really low-level relationship conflict, I typically know that one of the two of you is surrendering your opinion too early and too quickly because you're uncomfortable with disagreement and conflict, and you just want peace, so you shut up. And this is routine in marriage relationships. You know that, don't you? You know that. And we think it helps, and maybe it does temporarily, but that there is, in fact, it makes the long-term cure worse. Okay, here's a scenario. So you're having an issue about something. I don't even know exactly what to say it is, but there's quite a bit of disagreement. And so you decide that, well, my partner's really strong about this, and I just don't want to get into it. I don't want to be honest. I don't want to say that, so I'm just going to kind of go along with it. I'm just going to be quiet, and so you don't say anything. Well, it comes up again a few months later, and then it comes up again 6 months later, and it comes up a year later, and nothing. And it comes up 5 years later, and suddenly you say, I've had enough. The wire snaps, and it all comes out. And who looks like the idiot? Who? The one that didn't say anything. And the other partner rightfully says, where did this come from? You haven't said anything for 5 years. Does this happen in real life? I hear it all the time. All the time. I mean, I've seen it happen for 20 years. And I've seen it happen. A couple comes in and they've been married 25, 30 years, 40 years. And suddenly some issue comes up and the husband looks at her and it's like, we've been married 40 years and I've never heard this. It's like, well, for the first time in 40 years, you've had a safe environment to share it. I'm sorry, but the other person was never courageous enough, never honest enough, never vulnerable enough to share it. Shame on you, but here we are. Here we are, 40 years later. And this is common. But don't be that person 40 years from now, 5 years from now, 6 months. Don't be that person. Just remember, change. If you want to grow in your relationship and grow deeper, you have to talk about harder things. The things that in some way psychologically, emotionally are keeping you apart. They're keeping you apart. Now, I mean, some of this is generational, by the way. I don't think my parents would know what to do with any of this. I just don't believe it. You know, part of the builder generation, oh man, my mom and dad cannot have this conversation. And, you know, my mom she just let it all go in so many ways. And okay, you can say in the end of the day, they loved each other, you know, till they died, and, you know, and it's like, well, yeah, I guess it worked, and, you know, but at the same time, I wonder what could have been the depth of love and understanding had they chose to have harder, deeper conversations. How much more intimate could they have been? Could the relationship have been less platonic and less revolving around work and career and making a living? And could it have been more intimate and relationally, emotionally satisfying? Could it have been? Well, I know the answer to that. I mean, the answer is yes. Yes, but they chose to sacrifice all that because of peace faking. And my parents were wonderful, wonderful people in that regard. But nonetheless, I saw that played out in front of me the whole time, and I've dealt with it, tried to deal with it in our own relationship. But really, if you want a growing relationship that's going deeper, you'll have to get deeper into dealing with issues of conflict. You just will. You can't let it all go. Sometimes it has to, of course. Number 5, conflict is redemptive. You do know, right, that conflict is really central to the whole redemptive story, right? How so? Well, if we go back to the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve were tempted, they eat the fruit of the tree, they fall, God calls them out. Do you remember God calls them out? And each one, to the serpent, to the woman, to the man, he says something. He says something. Listen. To the serpent, he said, hear me, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, you will strike his heel. What are you hearing? Are you hearing conflict? The word enmity is conflict. So really, Genesis 3, God said, there is going to be an unending conflict between you, Eve, and the serpent, and the children of Eve. It's unending. Until finally one will come who crushes your head, and that is the Messiah. And that final crushing doesn't actually happen until his return. But there was a crushing that happened at the cross. When you see the cross, people, when you see the cross, you're seeing the temporal end of conflict that began at the beginning. The whole time. We call it cosmic conflict. There's 5 kinds of conflict. And this is called cosmic conflict. Conflict between a supernatural, between the other worlds and ourselves. And then he says, he spoke to the woman, he said, your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. Now, you can't pay me enough tonight to talk about what that means. You can't pay me enough. But whatever, I'd love to have this conversation, but whatever it means, we knew, and theologians have disagreed for over 2,000 years about what this means. And so there is no common accepted understanding of what this means. But there's a general agreement that what it means is that there's going to be some level of conflict, interpersonal conflict that goes on between male, female, husband, wife. It's there, and it was there pronounced right there, Genesis 3. It's right there. It's right there. And so that's part of the world east of Eden. That's what it means to live east of Eden. In a fallen world, this is what was pronounced upon humanity. Now, we know that in Christ, there's an answer to this because the head of the serpent has been crushed. But we know there's an answer to it. But that doesn't mean the problem isn't there. It's still there. Okay? And then hear this. Men, it's your turn. You know what he said to you? Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, because dust you are, and to dust you will return. What does that sound like to you? Is this real? Is God's pronunciation real? Is it true? Do you see any thistles in the field? We have a field. The guy who went into natural farming, no fertilizer, no herbicide, no insecticide. He has a field just as you go out of town. And it sticks out like a sore thumb because you can't see the soybeans from the weeds. You can't see them. You don't even know they're there. And of course, in this really amazing Mennonite community where all the rows are, exactly straight. This is like crazy. And then there's that field. It's just, I go by it, it's like, what? But I go by it and I say, this is it. This is east of Eden, right here. This is what it would be if we weren't stewards in some way of managing. This is what it would become. Maybe some people would like it that way. But nonetheless, that's the nature of it. This year, earworm was a horrible problem, and so there was spraying, and because there wouldn't be a crop. The earworm would win. They would win. But that's the curse. And so is there conflict there? Yeah. Man and nature are in conflict. So here we have some basic principles about conflict that I think if you're thinking about them, I think that you can see the application. How does this work out? You can see how it works out. By knowing those things, you begin to gain a different perspective about how do we go about handling conflict in our marriages and in our families. This makes a tremendous difference. This is where you can't do what you don't know. And when you have a different way of understanding the nature of conflict, it changes the way that we go about handling it with each other. Now, here's just a few guidelines that I'd like to add in just a few minutes here. Just think about these first. So, because I believe what I do about conflict, number one, I choose to believe that my spouse has a good heart and wants the best for me. I choose to believe that. That's where I start. That's where I start. I choose to believe that my spouse has a good heart and wants what's best for me. Listen to Paul. He says, love always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, it always perseveres. Always. It never fails. Can we say that? By the way, if you've reached the point where we don't believe these things about love anymore, we don't believe that our spouse has a good heart, we're in some deep brackish water. We really are. Number two, remind yourself that you are more than a husband or wife to each other. You are brothers and sisters in Christ. In fact, you are joint heirs of Christ. How would you treat each other if that was a reality? What would conflict look like then? In 1 Peter 3:7, Peter's talking to husbands, and he says, husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner, and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Prayers are hindered when men don't treat their wives like heirs of the promise. That's hard, isn't it? Isn't that hard? Fourth, seek to know the truth of the matter. Seek to know the truth of the matter. And that requires honesty and vulnerability. So many times, all I care about is being right. All I care about is getting my way. All I care about is the way this looks. Okay, if I really want to know the truth, if I really want to correspond with what's really real, I'll seek the truth. Ephesians 4, it said, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into him who is the head. Joined and held together by every supporting ligament, it grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. But speaking the truth in love is how it begins. Another thing here, refuse to take offense before the whole matter is heard. Refuse to take offense. If I believe that conflict is positive, I don't need to be offended. I mean, okay, I don't know if you are what you listen to, but we are in such an offended society. Oh, I'm just so tired of it. Everybody takes offense over everything. And those of us who are a little older, it's like, I don't get it. I just don't get it. Somebody says something, on Facebook, and I'm so offended by that. Are you? Who makes you offended? You do. I do. Nobody makes me offended. And so here's something. If anything else you take home. Okay, let's choose to live the unoffended life. Let's choose to live it. Let's choose to live the unoffended life. You're just not going to offend me. And I tell my students that all the time. It's like, and I've told my church parishioners that, I said, you can say whatever you want. You are not going to offend me. I will not allow you to control the way I feel about you or the way I feel about anything else. You're not going to do it. I'm not having it. So I'm not going to be offended. You can say the worst things, and I'm going to look at you and say, yeah, that's really wrong. Or I'm going to say, yeah, that's really inappropriate. But you're just not going to get to me. I'm not allowing it. If we did that with each other, as husbands and wives and with our children, and we chose to live the unoffended life, we could actually talk about the real stuff. Because when you get offended, what happens? Oh, the defensiveness, the hackles, the porcupine comes out, right? The claws. I love this. I can't remember where I saw this. Let me see here. Proverbs 18, an offended brother is more unyielding than a fortified city. And disputes are like the barred gates of a citadel. A man's wisdom gives him patience. It is to his glory to overlook an offense. Ephesians 4, and don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down with your anger. And finally, number 7, identify the kind of conflict you're dealing with. Another point. Identify the kind of conflict you're dealing with. There's just a number of kinds of conflict. There's substantive. There's interpersonal. There's personal. And there's systemic. And then there's cosmic. I have really bad handwriting. Okay. So there's 5 kinds of conflict. And here's how this plays out. 90% of all conflict is substantive. It's about ideas, things, beliefs, data, and so forth. And it's the lowest kind of level of conflict, and in most cases, it's the easiest to resolve. There's the least amount of emotion in this. And interpersonal conflict would be, when we are at each other. 2 people are having a tiff of some kind over something, but it's become personal. It isn't just about this anymore. It's about the way that we're treating each other. Intrapersonal conflict is the conflict I have within myself. It might be about identity. It might be about how I view myself. All kinds of things related to myself. Conflict I have with me. And this is big. And then systemic conflict is a conflict that exists, like, for example, in your family, and everybody is engaged in it. Everybody has become wrapped up in it. Churches have systemic conflict. This is really what Elvin was dealing with, was systemic conflict that started here. And then it became here. And so everybody's engaged. Cosmic conflict is kind of conflict within the supernatural realm, or it might be conflict you're having with God or with the Spirit, or a church might have in dealing with some spiritual fortresses within them and so forth. Now, here's what I mean by this point. What oftentimes happens is we have a conflict that starts here in our family or in our marriage. We're disagreeing about something, about an idea, about a belief. And in the course of the conversation, I say something like, you always, or you never, or I say, why is it that? And before long, it becomes this. Now you're kind of attacking the person. And it's not about this anymore. We've stopped talking about the color of the couch, and now we moved. Why is it that you always have to have your way? But before long, I mean, there's language there that moves it here. When we start talking about who the person is and how they perceive themselves. Here's the thing. Anytime, by and large, a couple comes to see me with some problems, they always talk about this when they come. Or maybe this. But what you learn in about 30 minutes is that it's this. Because once a conflict goes here, the solutions for it are really difficult. Once you start attacking somebody's view of themselves or how you view who they are as people or who they are as your spouse or who they are as a Christian or who they are as a mother or father, once you go there, you're in deep doo-doo. It's hard to take this back because you've said something really judgmental and value-oriented and related to who that person is to you. It isn't just about something anymore. So what I'm saying here is that when we're dealing with conflict in our families and our marriages, you've got to keep it here. You have to keep it here. And so the language we use matters. It really matters. So you can't make it personal. You can't drive it here. Because once you drive it here, the way back is just so hard. It's so hard. Words of basic apology and forgiveness don't end this, typically. You're looking at saying things related to apology and forgiveness dozens of times to overcome that. And so what often happens, this is the danger in relationships, is that people won't keep an issue here. And they'll start making it personal, and pretty soon they start attacking the person themselves. And now you have a problem. Okay? One last thing here before we just kind of bring an end to this. Can I show you one other thing here? I have something I'm going to have you take home with you. I'm going to take a moment to do this. This is a really helpful tool for you in any way. There are really only 5 ways to approach conflict. There's really just 5 ways. And everybody has a preferred way of doing it, and I have an assessment here to show you what your way is, how you prefer to handle conflict in a relationship. You should know this about your spouse, This is a key to unlocking the language you use in helping each other deal with conflict. Okay? There's like what we call a 9-1, which is a I win, you lose. It's the shark. This is an approach that many people take. If you had a disc scale, if you're a high D on a disc scale, well, this is probably going to be you. I win, you lose. Winner takes all. Okay? Anybody like that? I want to see your hands. Then there's what we call a 9-9. See, this is also called competing. Now, here's how this works. These quadrants. The more you care about relationships, you'll be on this side. The less you care about relationships, you'll be on this side. The more you care about agenda and goals and tasks, the higher you'll be up here. So the shark cares about goals and tasks, don't give a rip about relationships, really. Over here, this is a collaboration. And this is what we call a win-win. This is kind of the preferred method in most cases. And that is, we're going to work together. This is also the problem solver. We're going to work together to try to provide an answer or solve a problem. We're going to keep it at the substantive level if we can. And we're going to work on it until we both find a solution that's we're both willing to accept. So it's high relational, high task. Okay? So here we have kind of a 1-1. And this is the lose-lose. And that is, this is the owl. This is the turtle. Stick in your head. This is the avoider. That's what this is. I don't like conflict, so I'm withdrawing immediately. And I don't really care that much about my agenda. I'll let it all go. Okay? And so this here is the 1-9. Okay? And so this is the accommodating. And in accommodating, I'm willing to let go of all of my agenda just for the sake of preserving the relationship. Okay, so this is the teddy bear. And in the middle is the fox. And this is compromising. You can call this win-win. Actually, this is really kind of like we all win a little, but we also all lose a little. Okay? So the point is, every one of you you'll find yourself in one of these spectrums the most. And that makes a huge difference in the way that you approach your marriage, the way that you approach your kids. So one last thing. And I could have started with this, but I wanted to end with this something super positive. Keep telling yourself that God is in this somehow. You may not know. You may not know how, but God is in it. And we pray together in the midst of conflict, and we ask Him to give us wisdom through it. His wisdom begins when we let go of self-interest and self-protection. Okay, we're going to take a pause right there. I'm going to ask Karen to come up. We're going to take some questions, and I'm going to direct all the questions to her because she's the one who really knows stuff on a more practical level. And so let's take some questions. It doesn't have to be about anything we just talked about. Yeah.
So on your board over here, can you, depending on the conflict, can you end up being in different thoughts?
Yes. In fact, theoretically, you should be able to use all five. You have one that you prefer based on your personality, but you should be able to use all five, because sometimes you should just be a 1-1. You should walk away. You all know you've been in a situation that you should have just walked away from, right? And sometimes you should compromise or whatever, but the situation determines. Yep. And you won't be purely one of those. You'll be several. Good question, thank you. Somebody asked Karen a really hard question because she so wanted to be up here and so anxious.
There's going to be conflict.
Karen, do you ever go to bed angry? Or mad?
Yeah, there you go.
No, the guilt would get to me first, I think, on that. He's hard to, well, you just heard his philosophy, so he's actually hard to, you'd hardly get mad, which kind of ticks me off sometimes. Yes.
What if we asked you that question when you first got married?
Actually, I don't think I did go to bed mad, because I was taught that way. That was one thing I was taught from my mom, is to never go to bed mad. Because, and I think it was partly my personality is more of a people pleaser. And so I really wanted him to like how I was handling things. Mm-hmm. And I had a hard time going to sleep if that would happen. And I tend to loop things. I don't know if any of you do that. But it just keeps looping. And so that doesn't mean that I didn't go to bed without completely resolving. Because some things take a little longer to resolve. And sometimes the walking away was probably more appropriate at that time. Yeah.
Something we agreed on early on is that we may not be able to resolve everything before we go to bed, but we can resolve some things, and that is we can resolve attitude. Mm-hmm. Because I think, like she was saying, and I know I stressed this early on because she's more of a 1-9. And so I was realizing that she's willing to accommodate, but she'll loop everything. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, I have to be more sensitive about that, because I can be more of a 9-1 or 9-9, and so I can fall asleep. When I'm tired, I fall asleep.
And guess what I do?
That's right.
Are you awake?
Are you? What do you mean you're falling asleep? No, so we kind of came up with that. We have to find a way, and because something I kept stressing, and we kept talking about is that, okay, there are just some things that right now we can't resolve them. And we may have to go to bed a lot of nights without finishing this off, because we're neither one of us, or I'm not at a place, I'm not at a place where I can come to terms with this yet. And I'm going to need some time. Again, I don't believe in magic. And I don't believe that God has to do a miracle to accomplish his purpose in us. It's day by day, moment by moment, hard work. Okay. Someone else. That's a great question. It's like awesome.
Oh, good, that was done.
Yeah. Oh, no.
So would she be the first one to compromise to things? Or would you do that?
It depends on what the issue is,
Yeah.
because we have some things that, and I'm sure that's true for everybody.
Well, I mean, so a lot of us in our backgrounds of how we deal with people managing and whatnot, a lot of times you are just trying to find a compromise
Yep.
because the immediate picture of what you're working on just needs a quick resolution. But
Yep.
the big picture, obviously, you need to work towards that win-win goal and whatnot. Now, I guess we're dealing with just our spouses and whatnot, but in our case, we actually work together too. So,
Yep.
when we both manage our own areas, it was different, because now that we came together, like, well, now we're in that, but you know what, I've kind of rolled back to where I guess I look at compromising sooner, just because I hate wasting the effort and energy into something that really has no meaning whatsoever. So a non-essential task.
Yep. One of the things that happens, when you do the assessment, one of the warnings is, if you are always going to do 9-9, you better have a lot of time on your hands. A lot of time. And sometimes you just can't do that. And that's a future goal. I think in every marriage relationship, I'm guessing that the two of us have practiced about every one of these, depending on what the issue. I think there are times when she's very glad to take a 1-9 position, just because at the point we're at, she knows where I am, and it's just like, right now, we're not going to get there. So this is going to have to be brought up again. Yeah. Wouldn't you say so?
I agree.
Yeah, I think so. Or was that a 1-9 response?
Pretty much. No. No, I agree.
What's the advice to get out of the interpersonal?
What's that?
What's the
When you
advice?
get to the interpersonal,
Yeah.
so how do you get back out of that? I mean, what's,
No, you can answer that. That's your stuff.
Interpersonal, you have to remember that when you move from substantive to interpersonal, you're moving from objective to subjective. You're moving from data to things that are personal and emotional. And so what you got to remember is that they've given up on the substantive thing, and now it's personal. And so you have to meet them at that emotional level. If you don't meet them there, you don't ever solve it. We do this with our kids all the time. It gets personal for them, and then we buy them off. We let them have what they want, or distract them. Okay, why don't we? And it's like, no, really what they want and what they need is an emotional response from you that's going to be heartfelt, and it's going to meet them where they're hurting. And that usually is going to require an apology. And with my wife, and I think she can attest to this, but I don't always do it, and this is where I get off track. And so what I was going to say is that, so Karen, I realized that when we were talking about this, I said this, and I know that hurt you. And then I might ask, so how did that make you feel? And so I'm choosing to step into that personal realm, and a lot of us men don't like going there. But we go there, and then I'm at that point going to say, I'm really sorry that I said that. And so you're stepping right into it at that emotional level. If we keep it up here in the Platonic level, you never meet somebody in their heart. And it never satisfies. You may have said it and checked it off, but at the interpersonal level, you have to meet people at the level of the damage. There is no other answer for that. And this is why, in some cases, like with husband and wife, it's why you can say, yeah, we made up, it was great, and, but yet you kind of sense, And then if she would say something that in a way alludes to that, I know I missed the mark. Because no forgiveness, real forgiveness from the heart, hasn't really been established. By the way, this works with all relationships, all of them. And I think when Jesus says, you forgive people from your heart, that's what he's talking about.
So have you written this in a book?
What's that?
Do you have a book?
Well, I do, but I wouldn't let anybody read it. No, it's terrible. But this stuff is all there. Yeah. I did my dissertation on this. And so I did my dissertation on conflict management. And so this is when Pastor Alvin said yesterday he had kind of read everything about church mergers. Well, I've kind of read everything about church conflict. But anyway, other questions? This is good.
Any tips for young kids in teaching them how to handle conflict? It's a battle.
Any ideas? Use your CE.
Sit by CE. Yeah, I had them sit in front of each other,
Yep.
Indian style, right next to each other, staring at each other for about 5 minutes. That's all long it lasts. No, I'm just kidding. But we did do that, actually.
Yep.
Because they just, it's the same thing where it was moving into the next level. And somehow we had to stop it. And so, yeah, I like more hands-on. I like hands-on things.
Mm-hmm.
And so that a lot of times did break the ice of the conflict. But then, of course, there was a lot of teaching in that and talking to them about it, how we can handle it, and always having the phrase, if it's not, now I forgot. If that's not thoughtful, kind, considerate, and loving, And it was interesting because they grew up and they are now telling their kids that. And I'm thinking, well, okay, it did make an impression on them. And there were times where it's best you just go into your rooms, and take a break. He always sent one in because for some reason she was very spiritually sensitive from the Bible itself. And so he would send her in and have her read a specific passage that had to do with that specific topic of what was going on. This was when they were like junior high age. And of course, it's not that the door was quietly closed when she was sent in that room, so we knew the attitude was not quite there. But it was interesting how God's word, even though I don't think she always understood it at that age, did something to her. And at least it quieted her spirit. And I don't think she was I can't honestly say she was always ready to resolve it all. But it was a start. You want to add something?
Did you two always agree on the discipline style?
I think for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for the most part. Yeah, we believe in corporal punishment. we
Corporal
do.
punishment.
But it had
We
to
had
be.
3 girls.
Yeah, 3 daughters.
So their conversations were pretty
Yeah.
high and intense sometimes if any of you have all girls. But yeah,
And each one was different.
yeah.
They were emotionally wired very differently. And so like the oldest child, like many oldest child, how many of you are firstborns? Yeah, she wanted to approach life, very obediently, and she was amazing. And so, there wasn't a lot of discipline needed there, but our last one. That's the one that went into
That's
the
the one that
room
went
with
into
the
the-
Bible and, yeah.
What advice would you have for couples who have different styles?
Yep. Want to answer that?
You
Go
can
ahead.
start, I'll pitch in.
Okay.
'Cause-
Well, I think the first thing that has to happen, and again, I'm an academic, so I'm going to go back, because I don't think people do, you can do what you don't know. And so I think for me, the first thing is that I want to come to terms with why I discipline the way I do. And I want to understand my spouse. And I want to fully understand why they discipline the way they do. And I'm not happy. I'm not going to accept, well, that's how we did it in our home. I know that ain't it. That's cheesy. There's more than that. And so I want to have that conversation. And I've had that conversation with couples. So I'd start there with really knowing why. The reality is there isn't one right way, and I have to come to terms with that. There is not one right way. You can go to the Bible from now until kingdom come, and you're not going to prove to me there's one way. It ain't going to do it. Growing kids God's way. Well, that's great, but that's one way. That's all that is. It's just one way. There's many ways. And so I would want to know that. And the second thing I'd want to know is this. I'd want to know how does this relate to the way that you want to discipline? That would be important to me. So we can have some understanding about each other and then begin to kind of collaborate. You want to add to that? Now?
Yeah, on the practical side, we made an understanding, a vow, a promise that we would not counteract the other one.
Yeah.
So we might have differences of how we handled it, but right in the middle of that, Daddy doesn't get to come in and change it. Those are discussions that need to happen later, because then that works the mom against the dad or the dad against the mom. And so we made that agreement that if we saw one of us doing something that wasn't probably in agreement, with the other, we'd talk about that later, but we aren't talking about it now. So we're following through with how one started it and honoring that, respecting that. Otherwise, you got kids working against you or against each other. And we saw that many, many times and that did not work. So. I
That's a
don't know
hard
if that
question.
helps. So it is a hard
It's a
question.
really hard question. And,
I wish
We-
you guys would have came here like 15 years ago.
well, we wouldn't have had anything to tell you.
15 maybe.
Yeah.
One more question, do you like root beer floats?
Yeah, there we go. Do we like root beer floats?
One more question.
Yeah, yeah.
Is every conflict resolved?
No. No. Not every conflict is resolvable, and I'm going to let me add an addendum to that. Every conflict is resolvable for you. For you, right? I can decide to completely let something go when I've reached an impasse. Because, the Bible says, inasmuch as it is up to you, be at peace with all men. But it doesn't say, inasmuch as it's up to the other person, right? It's inasmuch as it's up to you. And so, a lot of conflicts become, you can't resolve them because the other party just won't. And the other party might die. And what do you do then? So somewhere along the line, you reach a point and you say, I've done what I can do, and for now, at this moment in time, I have to let it go. I have to give it to God and let Him do whatever work He does behind the scenes. And by the way, don't we do this with our kids? I'm assuming that not everybody has perfect kids in this room. Yeah, huh? Yeah, and so, and we may even do that, in a married relationship. There may be at times where we have to let some things go with the spouse. That's a hard question. I don't know. Are you okay? Does that make sense to you, or?
Yeah, it makes sense. In terms of countries and stuff like that. Somebody's beating up your kid,
Yeah.
you can't walk away from that. So, how do you resolve it?
Yeah, you look at conflict on the geopolitical level. Okay, this is complicated. This gets complicated.
They brought you into the fight, and you have to.
Yep. Yeah, you can walk away. You can walk away. But then you have to be willing then to concede a whole number of things, right? You have to be able to concede that here are possible ramifications of us walking away. I don't want to bring up a really old problem that may exist for one or two people in this room, but the United States didn't have to go into Vietnam. They didn't have to go there. We took it upon ourselves because we thought going to Vietnam would stop communism. Well, how helpful was that? And again, I'm not not any of that. I'm just saying at a geopolitical level, these things are really difficult to deal with because you have to think through all of the consequences of, what would happen if we weren't involved? But then when you bring it down home, we sometimes ask the same questions, even in our most intimate family relationships. Because there are battles that you may have, and we've had them with our children, where we ask that same question. This moment, do we just take a 1-1 perspective? and we have to entrust this to God and just leave it there and let it simmer. I mean, for example, if you have a child that's walked away from God, and there comes a point where you can't shove the gospel down their throat anymore. You just can't. You take opportunities to show the gospel, but at some point you just say, okay, God, we've done what we can. They're in your hands, and we will pray to the end that repentance will occur and that you will take them through whatever it takes. And now it becomes cosmic conflict. You're praying at a high level for God's intervention, and God is hearing you at that level. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but you can do what you can do, and at some point, we realize I have no more control. I don't have any more. I have nothing left I can do. That's so hard for us. Anyway.
Well, I think along with that, our tendency is, even in possibly that situation, is to blame ourselves and to get stuck there. And along with the idea of what you were saying earlier, is we should not lose control of the fact that our joy does not have to be robbed by some of those things. And we need to have the control of who is bothering us and who's not, and how we let it. And even our children, I think even when our kids were younger, I didn't want them to be able to control how the evening went and ended. And sometimes, it didn't go perfect and so on, but I wanted to go to bed knowing that I did what I could do, and then give that rest up to God and try again the next day. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a lot to that of happiness, letting that be robbed. And we've had our heartaches as well, but I think the biggest thing that helped me personally was to give that issue to God and to give that child to God. And then just never stop on the prayer.
Good time to stop.
Oh,
Oh, we're going to have a conflict, I know, with the root beer floats and, keeping...
Yeah, this was great. Really good. We have about 20 different groups of people watching online, so there will probably this many people watching online tonight.
Awesome.
Very, very helpful, and I hope you got a lot out of it. We're going to continue just the fellowship. For those who can stay in the fellowship hall, the elders are already there. And they're going to serve you root beer floats, and you can continue this conversation with Karen and Dr. Goertzen. And this was just very, very helpful, and I really thank you for coming on tonight and investing in your own marriage and your own family by doing so. Let's just end with prayer. Would you stand?
Before we pray, could I have 3 people stand at the door, and I have 3 copies of things that I'd like to hand out to everybody as you go out.